Firelight flickered against the cabin walls as the storm raged outside. But what Marcus Reed brought in from the snow that night wasn't a stray. It was destiny wrapped in fur. Decades later, people would still talk about the man who lived with the impossible and the bond that blurred the line between love and nature. Like this story, subscribe for more. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far their legacy reaches. The blood on the snow should have been a warning, but Marcus Reed was too numb to see signs anymore. A retired Black Army medic and widower, he lived alone in a weather-beaten cabin buried deep in the Montana wilderness, miles from anyone who might call his name. For 3 winters, he had survived like this, quietly, methodically, half alive. He told himself he liked the silence, but in truth, the silence was killing him. That night, the storm came down from the mountains with a vengeance, howling like the ghosts that haunted his sleep. He was sitting by the fire, tracing the edges of his late wife's photograph, when a faint, broken cry slipped through the roar of the wind. It didn't sound human, but it wasn't quite animal either. Marcus frowned, putting on his old parka, the same one that still smelled faintly of smoke and sand from Afghanistan. The second cry came softer, fading. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit him like a wall. The wind tore at his coat as he trudged through the snowdrifts, following the weak sound. The light cut through the dark, revealing trees heavy with ice, and then movement. Something small, trembling. He knelt down and brushed aside the snow. It was a tiny creature, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Black fur clumped with frost blood smeared across its paws. "What in God's name?" Marcus muttered. The little thing whimpered, barely clinging to life. His medic instincts took over. He lifted it gently, pressing it inside his coat. The body was stiff, but there was a faint heartbeat flickering like a candle. As he turned back, the storm grew worse. The snow blinded him, and for a moment he stumbled, nearly falling. He gritted his teeth, muttering, "Come on, man, don't you quit now." He wasn't sure if he was talking to the pup or himself. Inside, he set the creature by the fire, wrapping it in towels. The smell of wet fur and blood filled the air. He remembered too many nights in the field hospitals patching up men who wouldn't make it to dawn. He refused to let that memory repeat itself, not here, not tonight. He warmed some milk on the stove and fed it drop by drop through a syringe. The little body twitched. Its tongue flicked out weakly. Marcus smiled a slow, disbelieving smile. "That's it," he whispered. "You fight." Hours passed. The storm battered the cabin walls, but Marcus stayed by the fire, eyes fixed on the small life he had pulled from the snow. He didn't notice his coffee growing cold, or the photo of his wife still sitting on the table beside him. For once, he wasn't staring into the past, he was fighting for the present. Around midnight, the creature stirred. Its breathing deepened. Marcus exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. "You made it," he said softly. "Guess you're not giving up either." The pup's fur began to dry, revealing a coat so black it almost shimmered blue under the firelight. Its paws looked larger than they should for its size. Marcus didn't notice. He was too busy listening to the faint, steady rhythm of its breathing, a sound that seemed to echo his own heart. He leaned back, exhaustion washing over him. The nightmares that usually clawed through his sleep never came. When dawn broke, the snow outside glowed white and untouched, as if the storm had never happened. Marcus stood stiffly, bones aching, and walked to the stove. The towel moved. A tiny head lifted eyes, still closed but alive. He laughed under his breath, a sound rough and unused. "Well, look at you, still here," the creature whimpered softly. Marcus poured a fresh bowl of milk and placed it near the fire. The pup crawled weakly toward it, its little body shaking with effort. Watching it fight stirred something long buried inside him, the stubborn will to keep living even when everything in you wants to stop. "You're tough," he said. "Guess that makes 2 of us." He decided to call it Zephyr after the faint whisper of wind that had led him outside. He wrote the name down on a scrap of paper, the same way soldiers once wrote the names of lost brothers on their helmets. "Zephyr Reed," he murmured, liking how it sounded. It felt right, like the start of something new. Over the next few hours, he watched the pup sleep. The fire crackled, melting away the last of the frost on its fur. Marcus brewed another cup of coffee and sat beside it, feeling the familiar ache in his chest soften. He had spent so long pushing people away, telling himself solitude was safety. But now, as that tiny creature breathed beside him, safety felt different. It felt warm, fragile, alive. Outside, the storm had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, bouncing off the snow like shards of glass. The forest stood silent, serene. Marcus opened the door and stepped onto the porch, blinking against the brightness. The trail of blood that had led to his home was gone, erased overnight. All that remained were his footprints and a new one smaller beside them. He smiled quietly. The world had a strange way of giving you what you needed when you stopped asking. Morning came, sharp and pale sunlight cutting through the cracks in the cabin walls, glinting off the melted frost that clung to the window frame. Marcus Reed rubbed the stiffness from his hands and looked down at the small bundle curled beside the stove. The little black puppy Zephyr was still breathing, slow and steady, its chest rising like the rhythm of a fragile drumbeat. Marcus hadn't slept. He'd sat up all night, half afraid that if he looked away, the tiny thing would slip back into the silence from which it came. The cabin smelled of smoke, wet fur, and warm milk, but for the first time in years, it didn't smell like loneliness. It smelled like life. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and crouched beside Zephyr, whispering, "Still here, huh? That's a good sign." The puppy stirred, making a faint sound somewhere between a sigh and a whimper. Marcus reached out, hesitated, then brushed his finger gently over the soft fur. It was still cold, but not deathly cold. He smiled. "We made it through the night, soldier." His voice cracked on the last word, and he quickly looked away, pretending to be busy feeding the fire. The word soldier hadn't passed his lips since the funeral. It had been years since he called anyone that, yet somehow it felt right. The pup was small, helpless, and fighting to live just like he once had. For the next few days, Marcus lived by a new schedule. He fed Zephyr every 4 hours, logging every drop of milk, every sign of movement, every moment of warmth. His old medic instincts returned, precise and methodical, but this time they came with purpose, not duty. When he spoke, it wasn't to command, it was to comfort. "Easy now, little one. You're doing fine." His voice grew softer, more human. By the end of the week, Zephyr could stand on shaky legs. The first time he tried, Marcus watched with held breath, like a father watching his child take its first step. The pup stumbled paws, slipping on the wooden floor, and Marcus chuckled low, scooping him up before he hit the ground. "You're gonna need better balance than that if you want to survive up here." Zephyr wagged his tiny tail, and something in Marcus's chest loosened. He hadn't laughed like that in years. Outside, the snow was melting in patches, revealing the dark earth beneath. Marcus began taking Zephyr out, wrapped in a flannel blanket, just for a few minutes each day. The pup would press his nose into the cold air, sniffing curiously, his small body trembling, but his eyes bright. Marcus found himself talking as they walked about the ridgeline, the elk that passed through in spring, the river frozen solid a mile north. His words weren't meant for anyone else. They were small gifts to himself, reminders that he was still capable of saying things that didn't belong to grief. At night, Zephyr slept in a basket by the fire. Marcus often woke from a nightmare, explosions screaming the sharp scent of dust and iron, and found the pup watching him with calm golden eyes. He would reach out, and Zephyr would crawl closer, pressing against his chest. The steady weight of that small body anchored him back to reality every time. By the third week, Zephyr had doubled in size. His fur gleamed now rich black with silver strands along his shoulders. Marcus noticed his paws were large, too large for a normal puppy. But instead of concern, he felt pride. "You're growing faster than regulations allow," he teased. "Might need to slow you down before you outgrow the cabin." Zephyr tilted his head, the way dogs do when they're listening closely, and Marcus swore he saw something almost human in that expression, understanding. One morning, Marcus woke to the sound of scratching near the door. He looked over and saw Zephyr dragging something across the floor, a small, tattered leather glove stiff with age. Marcus froze. It was his glove, the one he'd lost the night of the blizzard. He knelt down, taking it gently from Zephyr's mouth. "You found this." The pup wagged his tail proud. Marcus sat back hard, holding the glove, remembering the freezing dark, the moment he'd thought he wouldn't make it home. Somehow Zephyr had gone back out there to that same storm and found a piece of him. His throat tightened. "You brought me my past, huh? Guess you figured I'd lost more than just a glove." He placed the glove on the shelf by the photo of his wife. For the first time, it didn't hurt to look at her face. Zephyr yawned, curling up at Marcus's feet. The wind outside softened, brushing against the cabin walls like a whisper instead of a warning. Days turned into weeks, and the cabin filled with the sounds Marcus had forgotten: the scrape of claws on wood, the soft jingle of a tin bowl, the quiet hum of someone else's breathing. He began repairing the fence, patching the roof, clearing snow from the porch. Not because he needed to, but because now there was something worth keeping safe inside. Each morning he poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for the routine. "Gotta start the day right, soldier," he'd say, smiling as Zephyr licked at the steam. There were still nights when the past came back, when Marcus woke in sweat and silence. But the difference now was the sound that followed a low whine, a warm nudge, a heartbeat pressed against his ribs. He no longer woke alone. The seasons were changing. The river thawed, the deer began to return, and Marcus found himself thinking ahead instead of back. He started carving again, small figures from driftwood, just as his wife used to. The first one he made was of Zephyr ears, too big, tail too short, but full of spirit. He placed it by the window where the morning light hit it. He didn't know why, but it made the cabin feel complete. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Marcus sat on the porch with Zephyr beside him. The air smelled of pine and thawed soil. "You know," Marcus said quietly, "I don't think you came here by accident." Zephyr rested his head on Marcus's knee. "Maybe God figured I needed one more chance to get it right." Spring crept slowly over Montana, melting the last veins of snow from the fields around Marcus Reed's cabin. The trees dripped quietly, and the frozen river began to hum again with life beneath the ice. Zephyr, once a trembling shadow against the fire, had turned into a sturdy young dog with a thick black coat and eyes that gleamed like amber glass. Every morning began the same way. Now Marcus poured coffee into a tin cup while Zephyr pawed impatiently at the door, waiting for their walk. Marcus used to wake up choking on his nightmares, drenched in sweat and silence, but now the first sound he heard each day was Zephyr's low bark and the gentle rattle of his food bowl. That sound, simple and real, had become his anchor to the present. The air was still cold enough to sting his lungs, but Marcus didn't mind. He strapped on his old military boots and stepped out with Zephyr trotting beside him. Together they followed the narrow trail behind the cabin, where pine needles carpeted the ground and birds were beginning to return. Zephyr sniffed the air with the alertness of a scout tail up shoulders moving in smooth rhythm. Marcus couldn't help but smile at how serious he looked. "You act like we're on patrol," he said. Zephyr turned his head briefly, as if he understood. The habit of talking to him had become second nature, and it no longer felt strange. Out there among the pines, Marcus talked about things he hadn't said aloud in years, about his wife Evelyn, who loved painting sunsets, about the men he served with, whose names he still carried in a small notebook, about the guilt that lingered like an echo he couldn't silence. Zephyr listened the way no human ever had, his ears twitching, his eyes steady, his silence kind. When Marcus's voice broke, the dog leaned gently against his leg until the words steadied again. They were small things, but they were saving him piece by piece. After breakfast, Marcus would sit at the table, repairing old tools or whittling bits of wood into shapes. Zephyr would lie nearby sometimes, watching, sometimes sleeping, always close enough that Marcus could reach down and feel the warmth of his fur. The routine gave the days a shape that grief had long erased. Feed the fire, walk the dog, clean the yard, check the traps, write something in the logbook. For a man who once counted hours by the sound of gunfire and heart monitors, this new rhythm felt like prayer. Yet healing like spring came in uneven patches. The nightmares still visited. One evening, Marcus was sitting by the fire when a branch snapping outside, sent a rush of adrenaline through him. His pulse spiked. He was no longer in Montana. He was back in the desert, under orange skies, hearing the crack of a sniper's shot. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, eyes wide but blind to the room around him. His hands shook uncontrollably, trying to reach for a rifle that wasn't there. Then through the haze, something heavy pressed against his chest. Zephyr had moved in close, his body pinning Marcus gently to the ground. The dog's heartbeat thumped steady and calm, a rhythm to follow out of the panic. Marcus matched his breathing to it, slow in, slow out, until the shaking eased. When the world finally returned, Marcus realized his face was wet with tears. Zephyr licked the salt away and stayed right where he was. "You're the reason I'm still here," Marcus whispered hoarsely. The dog didn't move, just pressed closer. From that night on, Marcus stopped locking the door to his bedroom. Zephyr slept at the foot of his bed, a dark silhouette against the faint light of the stove. Whenever the dreams came, the dog's presence pulled him back before they swallowed him whole. It wasn't therapy, at least not the kind anyone could prescribe, but it worked. The nightmares came less often. The bottles of medication gathered dust on the shelf, and Marcus began to feel like himself again, someone capable, not broken. Weeks passed, and the snowmelt turned to mud. Marcus took Zephyr further each day, teaching him commands with patient repetition. Stay, come, heal. Zephyr learned quickly, faster than any dog Marcus had ever seen. His eyes followed every gesture, every tone, as if he understood not just the words, but the meaning behind them. Sometimes Marcus caught him staring, really staring, like he was trying to read his thoughts. It was unsettling and comforting all at once. In town, when Marcus stopped for supplies, people would ask about the big black dog. Some said he looked like part shepherd. Others swore there was wolf in him. Marcus just smiled and said, "He's family." It was the truth, simple and unexplainable. On the days when loneliness crept close again, Marcus would sit outside Zephyr's head, resting on his knee, and watch the light change across the mountains. He'd think about how easily he could have missed that faint cry in the storm, how one step less that night might have left them both buried under snow. That thought made him shiver, not from cold, but from gratitude. One afternoon, Marcus found Zephyr digging near the fence. "Hey, what are you doing, boy?" he called. The dog looked up, muzzle dusted with dirt tail wagging proudly. Marcus walked over and saw a half-buried stick. No, not a stick, a bone. He tensed until he realized it wasn't human, just a deer leg. Still, it made him pause. Zephyr barked once, sharp and confident, as if proud of his discovery. "You've got a good nose," Marcus said, patting his head. "Maybe too good." He filled the hole and led him back toward the porch. But that night, as the wind rose again, Marcus lay awake, thinking about how easily Zephyr adapted to wild things, his hearing, his instincts, the way he moved through the forest like he belonged to it. Marcus dismissed the unease. Whatever Zephyr was, he was also the reason the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. When morning came, the unease was gone. He woke to find Zephyr sitting by the window, watching the sunrise. Marcus followed his gaze, and for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking at life from behind glass. He felt like he was part of it again. He poured 2 cups of coffee, smiled, and said, "We made it through another night, soldier. Zephyr's tail thumped once against the floor in reply. The morning the snow finally melted off the back ridge, the air smelled of pine sap and thawed soil. Marcus woke early, the kind of morning habit he'd carried from deployment body up before the sun heart, already waiting for something to fight. But this time, what stirred him wasn't dread. It was Zephyr. The dog was already awake, pacing by the window, muscles taut beneath his dark coat. The forest beyond glowed faintly gold under the early light, and Marcus smiled, stretching stiff shoulders. "You smell spring, huh? Guess we both do." He poured 2 bowls, one of oatmeal for himself, one of meat scraps for Zephyr. The dog waited until Marcus gave the quiet nod before eating, tail wagging lazily. It amazed him still how easily discipline came to Zephyr, how he seemed to listen not to orders, but to meaning. After breakfast, they took their usual walk through the woods. The trail was slick from meltwater, the river singing again. Marcus felt alive, alert, every sense tuned to the smell of mud and bark and the sound of his companion's steady breath beside him. He often wondered if this was what peace felt like, not the loud, cinematic kind, but something smaller, quieter, earned. Zephyr darted ahead, nose to the ground. Marcus let him explore, trusting him now. The dog moved with a confidence that made him seem older than he was. Suddenly, Zephyr froze, his tail stiffened, ears pricking forward. Marcus followed his line of sight and saw nothing, just brush and morning light. "Come on, boy, leave it," he called, but Zephyr didn't move. Then he lunged, a blur of muscle and purpose vanishing into the thicket. Marcus cursed and ran after him, branches whipping at his arms. He found Zephyr crouched low, teeth bared, breath fast. In front of him lay a small gray rabbit, limp and still blood seeping into the wet ground. Marcus stopped short, chest tight. "No, no, no," he whispered. Zephyr looked up, ears lowered, tail wagging, once proud but gentle. Marcus knelt beside him, the familiar scent of blood cutting through the forest air, sharp and metallic. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured, his voice heavy with guilt. The dog tilted his head, as if confused by the sadness in his tone. The rabbit's death shouldn't have hit him this hard, but it did. It took him back to nights when he'd held dying soldiers, to the helplessness of watching life leave something he'd tried to protect. He reached out, touched Zephyr's muzzle. "We don't take life unless we have to understand." Zephyr lowered his eyes, stepping back. Then, to Marcus's surprise, he didn't eat. Instead, the dog nudged the rabbit toward Marcus's boots and sat down, still and solemn. The gesture silenced him. It wasn't hunger, it was offering. Zephyr had done what his instincts commanded, but brought it home to the man who taught him gentleness, as if saying, "This is what I am, but I still belong to you." Marcus felt the sting of tears, wiped them away quickly, and whispered, "All right, soldier, we'll give it a proper burial." They dug a small hole near the riverbank. Marcus placed the rabbit inside, covering it with soft soil. Zephyr watched the whole time, head lowered. When it was done, Marcus brushed dirt from his palms and sat beside him. "You're something else, you know," that he said softly. Zephyr nudged his arm, then laid his head on Marcus's knee. The sun climbed higher, light glinting off the river like pieces of glass. They stayed that way for a long while, man and dog, or whatever Zephyr was watching the current move past. After that morning, something changed between them. Zephyr became quieter, more watchful. He moved differently through the woods, less like a pet, more like a creature of the wild who chose to stay near civilization. At night, Marcus sometimes woke to find him standing by the window, eyes glowing faintly gold in the firelight, staring out into the forest. "What do you see out there?" Marcus would whisper. Zephyr would glance back briefly, then return to his silent vigil. It wasn't fear, Marcus realized. It was awareness, a kind of knowing that stretched beyond the human world. The unease grew, but so did the bond. Days later, Marcus visited town for supplies. The clerk, a grizzled rancher named Tom Henderson, nodded toward Zephyr, sitting calmly in the truck bed. "That's one big dog you've got there," Tom said. "Shepherd mix." That's what they told me, Marcus replied. Tom squinted. He's got a look in his eyes, though, not like a dog's. You sure he ain't part wolf? Marcus laughed lightly, but didn't answer. On the drive back, the question echoed in his mind. Part wolf. The idea made too much sense, but he didn't want to believe it. Zephyr had saved his life more times than he could count. Wild or not, he was family. Back at the cabin, Marcus left the truck door open. Zephyr jumped down gracefully, landing without sound despite his growing size. He followed Marcus to the porch, sitting at attention. They think you're part wolf, Marcus said, shaking his head. Zephyr's ears flicked indifferent. Don't worry, you're more human than most people I know. That night the wind rose again, carrying faint howls from the distant ridge. Marcus froze mid-sip of coffee. It wasn't just one, it was a chorus low and ancient. Zephyr's ears perked, eyes glowing as he stared toward the sound. The noise stirred something in Marcus too, a memory of feeling surrounded, vulnerable, waiting for something unseen. He swallowed hard. You're not going anywhere, you hear me, he said firmly. Zephyr turned, walked to him, and placed a paw on his foot, a gesture Marcus had come to recognize as reassurance. Still, sleep didn't come easy. He lay awake watching Zephyr curled by the stove, black fur glistening in the firelight, muscles twitching under his skin as if his body remembered the chase. Marcus thought of the rabbit of the blood, of the way Zephyr had offered it up with what looked almost like sorrow. The day began like any other, cool sunlight spilling through the blinds, dust dancing in the thin beams of gold that cut across the wooden floor. Marcus Reed tied his boots while Zephyr waited by the door, tail sweeping the ground in quiet rhythm. They had fallen into a life that made sense now, routine, steady, almost sacred. Marcus no longer felt like a ghost wandering his own house. He felt like a man with a purpose again. Zephyr had grown into a powerful animal, sleek, and muscled his coat deep black with faint silver along his neck. When he moved, it was with the confidence of a creature that knew its strength. Marcus poured coffee into a thermos, glanced at the calendar on the wall, and smiled faintly. It had been 6 months since the storm, 6 months since a dying puppy had entered his life and turned silence into peace. He clipped on Zephyr's lead and opened the door, ready for patrol soldier. The dog barked once low and certain. They headed into the woods, following the narrow trail that wound through the pines. The air was sharp with the scent of thawed earth, the kind that hinted summer was close. Birds were back filling the forest with sound, and Marcus felt something inside him finally settle. The nightmares had grown quieter. The pills stayed in their bottle. He had purpose now, walking, training, fixing, simply existing. Zephyr trotted beside him, ears twitching, eyes scanning the horizon like a sentry. They'd gone about a mile when Marcus noticed how still the forest had become. No birds, no wind, just a silence, heavy and watchful. Zephyr stopped, two muscles coiling beneath his fur. His head turned sharply toward the ridge ahead. Marcus felt the hairs on his neck rise. Easy, he whispered, unclipping the leash. Zephyr stepped forward, nostrils flaring. Marcus squinted, trying to see what had caught his attention. Then he saw it, a shape slipping between the trees, smooth and low golden fur flashing in the light. A mountain lion. Marcus froze, pulse hammering. It was huge, easily 180 pounds, moving with the same deadly grace he'd seen in predators overseas. He knew enough to stay still to make himself large, but instinct screamed to run. Zephyr didn't move. His body went rigid, tail-straight eyes locked on the cat. The lion crouched, a muscle twitch beneath its shoulder blades, preparing to strike. No, Marcus whispered, stepping back slowly. Easy, boy. Don't. But Zephyr was already moving. In a blur, he leapt forward, placing himself between Marcus and the predator, a black streak against the green. The lion hissed, lips peeling back to reveal teeth made for killing. Zephyr's answering growl was deeper, older, primal. The sound shook the air. Marcus had never heard anything like it, part thunder, part command. It was the voice of something that didn't belong to civilization. For a moment, even the lion hesitated. The two animals faced each other still as stone, each testing the other's will. Marcus couldn't breathe. He reached slowly for the rifle slung over his shoulder, though he knew it was too late to matter. If the lion charged, it would be over before he could aim. Zephyr growled again, lower this time, and took a step forward. The lion snarled, muscles tensing, then lunged but stopped mid-motion, pawing the dirt as if reconsidering. Zephyr didn't retreat. He held his ground, ears flat, eyes blazing. Marcus realized what was happening. The mountain lion wasn't backing down from a dog. It was facing something it recognized as an equal predator. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then with a final snarl, the lion turned away, melting back into the shadows of the forest. Zephyr stood motionless until the last sound faded, then turned toward Marcus, panting lightly, tail wagging once, as if asking, "You okay?" Marcus sank to his knees, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He reached for Zephyr's hands, trembling, and buried his fingers in the thick fur around his neck. "You're crazy," he whispered, voice breaking. "You could have been killed." Zephyr pressed his head against Marcus's chest, calm, steady, alive. The adrenaline hit Marcus hard. He closed his eyes, breathing in the dog's scent, wild earth pine, something untamed, yet safe. When his heartbeat finally slowed, he pulled back enough to meet Zephyr's gaze. There was intelligence there, but something else too understanding. Not obedience, not instinct. Choice. "You protected me," Marcus said softly. "You knew." Zephyr blinked slowly, almost like a nod. The wind picked up again, the forest waking from its eerie pause. Birds began to call, distant but reassuring. The world, as if satisfied, resumed its rhythm. Marcus stood, brushed snow and dirt from his knees, and looked out toward the ridge where the lion had vanished. "Let's go home," he said quietly. On the walk back, Zephyr stayed closer than usual, brushing against Marcus's leg every few steps. His breathing was even confident, but Marcus could still feel the power radiating from him, the same power that had stopped a predator in its tracks. Back at the cabin, Marcus checked Zephyr carefully. There was a small scratch on his shoulder, barely bleeding. He cleaned it gently, muttering under his breath, "You're fearless, you know that, reckless too." Zephyr sat perfectly still, watching him with patient eyes. Marcus bandaged the wound, then ruffled the fur on his head. "I don't know what you are," he said, "but I'm glad you're mine." That night he couldn't sleep. The image of the lion haunted him, not out of fear, but awe. He kept seeing the way Zephyr had stood between them, unwavering. There was something ancient in that courage, something that didn't belong to ordinary dogs. As the fire crackled, Marcus sat on the floor beside Zephyr, his back against the couch, listening to the steady sound of the animal's breathing. "You saved my life," he murmured. "Guess we're even now." Zephyr lifted his head slightly, then rested it on Marcus's knee, eyes half closed in contentment. The warmth of the fire painted the walls in orange and gold, and Marcus realized this quiet companionship, this wordless understanding was what peace felt like. The first real warmth of spring arrived in waves, slow and deceptive, wrapping the Montana Valley in a false sense of peace. Marcus Reed could feel it even before he saw it. The sound of melting snow trickling from the roof, the smell of wet pine, the soft hum of life returning to the woods. Zephyr had healed from his scrape with the mountain lion, quickly moving with the same quiet strength that had saved them both that day. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about that standoff, the way Zephyr had faced the predator, not with fear, but authority. It had been more than instinct. It had been command. Over the following weeks, Zephyr's behavior began to shift in ways Marcus couldn't ignore. The dog grew larger still, his muscles thickening, his gait fluid and deliberate. His eyes, once a warm amber, now burned gold in the right light, reflecting the world with an intensity that seemed almost human. He patrolled the property on his own, circling the cabin at dawn and dusk, marking territory like a soldier on watch. When Marcus called him back, Zephyr obeyed, but only after completing his circuit, as though ensuring the perimeter was secure. One afternoon, when Tom Henderson stopped by to drop off some extra fencing wire, he took one look at Zephyr and whistled low. "Marcus, you sure that's a dog?" Marcus forced a laugh. "He's just big for his breed," Tom squinted. "Breed of what, Bear?" They both laughed, but Marcus saw the unease flicker in his friend's eyes. That night after Tom left, Marcus couldn't shake the thought. He sat by the fire with his coffee, watching Zephyr chew a bone near the hearth. "You're not normal, are you?" he said softly. Zephyr lifted his head, ears twitching, gaze calm but sharp. Marcus smiled faintly. "It's all right, neither am I." Still, the question nagged at him. A week later, when Zephyr's appetite increased and his size made him too heavy to lift, Marcus decided to take him into Whitefish to see Dr. Ellen Brooks again. The drive down the mountain roads was long and winding, the kind that gave him too much time to think. Zephyr sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the trees flash by. Every now and then he pressed his nose against the window, not whining, just observing. The first time Marcus had made this drive, Zephyr had been a shivering handful of fur. Now he filled half the cab. When they arrived, the clinic was busy, but the moment Dr. Brooks saw Zephyr step through the door, everything stopped. "Good Lord," she whispered, eyes wide. "That can't be the same puppy." Marcus nodded grimly. 4 months, Doc, maybe 5. "You tell me." She knelt cautiously, scanning Zephyr from head to tail. Her hand hovered over his back before finally settling there. Zephyr didn't flinch. His gaze followed her every move. "He's calm," she murmured. "Too calm. And his build, he's not just large, he's structured differently. You mind if I run some tests?" Marcus hesitated but nodded. "Go ahead, I need to know." Blood was drawn, measurements taken. Dr. Brooks murmured to herself as she recorded data. Weight 90 pounds, shoulder height, nearly 30 inches. Dentition atypical canines elongated. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I've worked with shepherd mixes my whole life. This isn't one," he frowned. "Then what is he?" She didn't answer immediately. "Let's see what the DNA says." The results would take a week, so Marcus returned home with Zephyr and tried to ignore the unease building in his gut. That night the howls came again, distant haunting rolling down from the northern ridge. Zephyr's head lifted sharply. He walked to the window, body tense. Marcus's stomach twisted. "No," he said. "Stay." The dog glanced back, eyes catching the firelight, then slowly he sat down. But his gaze never left the dark line of the mountains. The next morning, Marcus found new tracks near the edge of his property, too large, circling close, but never crossing the boundary. He knew what they were: wolves, a pack, and somehow instinct told him they weren't just passing through. They were watching. The days crawled by until the call finally came. Dr. Brooks's voice was tight. "Marcus, I need you to come in." He drove fast, stomach in knots. When he entered her office, she didn't speak at first. She simply handed him the printed results. One line stood out in bold: Canis lupus occidentalis, Northwestern wolf, 100% genetic match. Marcus stared at the words until they blurred. "That's impossible," he muttered. Dr. Brooks shook her head slowly. "It's not. He's a wolf, Marcus, a pure one. Maybe abandoned during a hunt, maybe separated from his pack in the storm. You found him at 2 weeks old. He never learned fear of humans." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "You're saying I've been raising a wild predator? I'm saying you've been raising a miracle," she replied gently. "He should have killed something by now, or run. But he hasn't. He's bonded to you. That's rare, nearly unheard of." Marcus set the paper down, breathing hard. "What happens now?" Dr. Brooks hesitated. "Legally, you're supposed to report him. Wolves are protected under federal law. Keeping one without a permit is a crime." His jaw tightened. "If I do that, they'll take him. Probably," she admitted. "Or worse, they'll relocate him to a sanctuary where he'll never see you again." Silence stretched. Marcus looked down at his hands, rough, scarred, shaking. He'd lost too much already: his wife, his brothers in arms, his purpose. He couldn't lose this too. "Doc," he said, finally, "you're not reporting this, are you?" Dr. Brooks hesitated, then sighed. "No, not yet, but you need to understand what you're living with. When he matures, his instincts will grow stronger. His loyalty is real, but his nature is wild. You can't fight that." "I don't want to fight it," Marcus said, voice low. "I just want to make sure he never forgets that I'm family." She nodded, but worry clouded her expression. On the drive home, Marcus kept glancing at Zephyr asleep in the back seat. The word wolf didn't change what he saw. A protector, a friend, the only thing keeping him steady. But it did make him think. Every time Zephyr's ear twitched, or his eyes glowed in the dark, Marcus wondered how much of the animal's heart belonged to him and how much belonged to the wilderness that had birthed him. That night, he sat on the porch under a rising moon. The week after the truth came out, Marcus Reed lived in a kind of suspended quiet, the kind that hangs over a man before he has to make a choice he doesn't want to face. The forest around the cabin hummed with life again, but inside, the silence felt heavier than ever. Every time Zephyr brushed past him, every time Marcus heard that steady heartbeat or saw the way the wolf waited at the door for permission to go out, the thought pressed harder the world would not understand this. A man could keep scars, grief, even madness hidden from sight, but not this. Not a wolf that slept by his bed and watched over him like a guardian spirit. He'd been sitting at the table for hours staring at the folded DNA report when the first knock came. It was Tom Henderson. "Marcus," he said carefully, eyes darting past him toward the sound of claws on wood. "You need to be ready. Somebody in town saw the vet's assistant buying supplies for you. They figured out what she was hiding. Word's spreading fast. Fish and Wildlife's gonna show up soon." Marcus's stomach clenched. "How long? A few days, maybe less." Tom sighed, removing his hat. "You know I'm on your side, but they're not gonna listen. They see a wolf, not what's between you two." Marcus looked down the hallway toward Zephyr lying near the stove. "He's never hurt anyone, doesn't matter," Tom said softly. "Law's the law." When his friend left, the cabin felt smaller. The fire snapped, the floorboards creaked, and Zephyr lifted his head, sensing the weight in Marcus's breathing. "They're coming for you," Marcus whispered. Zephyr rose, padded over, and rested his massive head on Marcus's knee. That simple act undid him. He buried his face in the thick fur, gripping it like a man holding a lifeline. "You don't understand," he said shakily. "They'll take you away, put you behind fences, call you dangerous. And maybe they're right. Maybe you are, but not to me. Never to me." Zephyr stayed still, his chest rising steady against Marcus's arm, calm as always. When Marcus finally looked up, the wolf was staring into his eyes with a quiet understanding that broke his heart. The next morning he called Dr. Brooks. Her voice was strained, but gentle. "Marcus, they called me. They want the records. I've delayed it as long as I can. Don't," he said quickly. "Please don't give them anything." "You're putting me in a hard position," she murmured. "If I lie, I lose my license. But if I tell the truth, you'll lose him." Marcus finished for her. "You know what they'll do. They'll lock him up until he forgets who he is, or worse." Silence. Then softly, "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer. He didn't have one. That night, Marcus packed a duffel with essentials, rations, tools, old field gear, and set it by the door. He wasn't sure if he was running or just preparing to. Zephyr watched the whole thing quietly, his golden eyes following every motion. When Marcus sat down exhausted, Zephyr approached and placed the same old tattered glove, the one from that first blizzard, on his lap. Marcus stared at it, throat closing. "You still remember," he whispered. "You're telling me not to give up." He looked out the window. The forest was dark, the moon sharp and cold. Somewhere far off, another pack howled, long and lonely. Zephyr's ears twitched, but he didn't move toward the sound. He stayed beside Marcus. "They're calling you," Marcus said softly. "And you're still choosing me." He smiled, pained but proud. "Guess I have to be worthy of that." The next day, he spent hours repairing the truck, checking old maps, trying to think of somewhere safe to go, somewhere beyond reach of the law. Canada, maybe. He'd lived in the field before. He could do it again. But each time he looked at Zephyr lying peacefully in the yard, he hesitated. The wolf was growing restless, but not with aggression. It was something more complicated, like he sensed the approaching storm. When Tom returned that evening, his face was grim. "They're coming tomorrow morning. 2 trucks, maybe 3. I heard the order myself. They plan to take him to the wildlife reserve in Helena." Marcus's jaw tightened. "He won't survive there." "You don't know that," Tom said. "I do," Marcus snapped. "He doesn't know cages. He knows this place, me the woods, the river. That's his world." Tom nodded, eyes full of sympathy. "Then you need to decide tonight, fight or run. Either way, I'll help." When he left, Marcus stepped onto the porch. Zephyr followed, sitting beside him. The mountains glowed faintly pink in the dying light. "You hear that?" Marcus said quietly. "They'll come for you tomorrow." Zephyr turned his head toward him, gaze unwavering. "You could go," Marcus continued, voice trembling. "You could just walk into those woods and never look back. No one would stop you." The wolf didn't move. Marcus swallowed hard. "But if you stay, I can't promise we'll win. They have guns, tranquilizers, laws I can't fight." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken meaning. Then slowly Zephyr leaned forward and laid his head across Marcus's lap. The weight of it, the trust, the choice was too much. Marcus pressed his hand to Zephyr's neck, feeling the slow, steady heartbeat under his palm. "You stubborn miracle," he whispered. "All right then, we stay together." That night the wind picked up again, shaking the shutters. Marcus couldn't sleep. He loaded the rifle, checked it twice, then sat beside Zephyr by the dying fire. Every creak outside made him tense. Around midnight, the wolf stood suddenly, ears pricked. Marcus froze. Headlights. 2 distant beams crawled through the trees, bouncing off the snow. Too soon, he muttered. He grabbed the rifle, heart pounding. Zephyr growled low, deep in his chest, ready. But the lights veered away, fading toward the logging road. "Just travelers, not the officials yet." Marcus exhaled shakily and sank to the floor, laughing bitterly. "We're jumpy, huh?" Zephyr pressed close again, laying down beside him, the warmth of his body easing the tremor in Marcus's hands. Dawn came pale and cold. Frost had returned to the ground, a thin white sheet that glimmered in the morning sun. Marcus brewed one last pot of coffee, hands steady despite the fear. "If this is it," he said quietly, "we face it like men." Zephyr stood by the door, calm and alert, tail flicking once. "No running," Marcus continued. "No hiding, just truth." He opened the door. The forest waited silent and vast, as if holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the hills, the sound of engines drifted faintly through the air. Marcus didn't flinch. He placed a hand on Zephyr's back, feeling the warmth, the life, the bond that had rewritten both their fates. "They'll never understand you," he murmured. "But I do." Zephyr looked up, eyes glowing with that steady golden light that had both haunted and healed him for months. In them, Marcus saw everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. The morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of light that cut through fog like a blade. Marcus Reed woke before the sun, though he hadn't really slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashing lights, hands reaching for Zephyr cages slamming shut. He sat at the table, staring at the half-empty coffee cup and the rifle leaning against the wall. Outside, the frost shimmered silver over the ground. The air carried the weight of something coming, inevitable, final. Zephyr moved quietly around the cabin, sensing his master's tension. He pressed his muzzle against Marcus's hand, and the man exhaled slowly. "We'll face it," Marcus said under his breath. "Together." A sound in the distance made them both pause, engine steady and deliberate, growing louder by the minute. Marcus rose, joints stiff, heart steady. He opened the door, and the crisp air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine oil and fear. Zephyr stepped outside, first tail low, but calm, standing sentinel at the top of the porch stairs. The convoy came into view, Two trucks with the Montana Fish and Wildlife emblem, a sheriff's cruiser behind them, and a smaller van with veterinary markings. The vehicles crawled up the dirt road, tires crunching over gravel, engines idling as they stopped near the gate. Doors opened. Men and women stepped out, heavy coats, clipboards, and cautious eyes. Among them was Dr. Brooks, her face pale but resolute. Marcus felt both relief and betrayal in her presence. One of the officials, tall and broad-shouldered with a gray beard, approached first. "Mr. Reed," he called, voice carrying authority. "We're here to take custody of the animal under state and federal regulations. You've been informed this is not a pet." Marcus's voice was calm but firm. "He's not an animal to me. He's family." "Be that as it may," the man replied, hand resting on the tranquilizer rifle slung over his shoulder. "He's still a wild species. This isn't optional." Zephyr growled low, a warning more than a threat. The officer's stance tightened, and two others lifted their rifles in reflex. "Easy," Marcus said quickly. "He won't hurt you unless you give him reason." Dr. Brooks stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Everyone stay calm. He's not aggressive unless provoked." The gray-bearded man gave a small nod, lowering his weapon a fraction. Marcus moved down from the porch, slowly, Zephyr shadowing every step. The wolf's head came to Marcus's waist, his golden eyes flicking between the strangers, measuring them with quiet intelligence. The scene held fragile as glass. Then another car pulled up behind the convoy. Tom Henderson climbed out, followed by an older woman Marcus didn't recognize until she spoke with command that silenced the field. "Judge Margaret Ellis," she said, holding up a folder. "I'm here to mediate this under emergency jurisdiction." The lead officer blinked, surprised. "Judge Ellis, with respect, this is a wildlife matter." "And yet you're about to destroy something extraordinary," she countered. She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, is this the animal in question?" "He's not an animal," Marcus said softly. "He's Zephyr." The judge nodded once. "Then let's discuss the law and the heart together." For the first time since sunrise, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. They gathered near the porch. Judge Ellis spread the documents across the hood of a truck. Under state precedent, there are provisions for special therapeutic exemptions involving wildlife-human bonding when proven beneficial to mental health recovery. I've reviewed Mr. Reed's record. He's a decorated veteran diagnosed with PTSD. Since acquiring this animal, his condition has improved significantly. "Doctor, your notes confirm it, Doctor." Brooks hesitated but nodded. "Yes, he's healthier, happier. I've witnessed it myself." The officer frowned. "This is a wolf, not a therapy dog. We can't make exceptions for apex predators." "We can when that predator has shown no aggression toward humans," the judge countered. The argument hung in the air, logic colliding with fear. Marcus listened in silence, his hand resting on Zephyr's back, feeling the wolf's steady breathing. Then a sound broke through the tension, something massive moving in the trees beyond the clearing. Heads turned, the rustle became crashing, snapping branches, heavy footsteps coming fast. One of the younger officers shouted, "Bear!" Before anyone could react, a massive grizzly burst from the tree line, foam around its mouth, eyes wild and unfocused. The crowd scattered instinctively, rifles raised, shouts cutting through the morning air. Marcus froze, every nerve screaming at him to move, but Zephyr was already in motion. In a blur, he leapt from the porch, planting himself between the bear and the humans. The roar that came from the wolf's throat was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, deep, ancient, commanding. The bear reared up, towering twice Zephyr's height, claws slashing at the air. The wolf didn't flinch. He held his ground, growling so low it vibrated in Marcus's bones. Dr. Brooks screamed for someone to shoot, but the judge shouted, "No, wait!" The grizzly hesitated mid-charge, taken aback by the ferocity in front of it. Zephyr advanced one step, his hackles high teeth bared. For a moment, Predator recognized Predator. Then astonishingly, the bear dropped back to all fours, huffed, and turned away, crashing back into the forest. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone stood frozen, the echo of the bear's retreat fading into the mountains. Zephyr remained still for a heartbeat longer, then turned, trotted back toward Marcus, and sat at his side like nothing had happened. His chest heaved slightly, his fur rippling in the cold breeze. Marcus knelt trembling and pressed his forehead against Zephyr's. "You saved them," he whispered. "You saved all of us." The gray-bearded officer lowered his weapon, awe written across his face. "In 30 years, he muttered, "I've never seen anything like that." Judge Ellis' straightened voice, steady but reverent. "Now, gentlemen, if anyone here still thinks this creature is just another wild animal, I suggest you reconsider." No one argued. The officers looked at one another, uncertain, humbled. Finally, the lead man spoke again, tone different, now soft and respectful. "Mr. Reed, we'll need to file an exemption review. It'll take time, but I think we can make something work." Dr. Brooks smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "He's not a threat. He's proof that some bonds are stronger than instinct." As the officials began packing their equipment, Marcus sat on the porch, still shaking Zephyr's head, resting on his lap. Tom stepped beside him, removing his hat. "Guess you didn't have to fight after all," he said quietly. Marcus managed a shaky laugh. "He fought for me." Tom nodded toward the retreating trucks. "You realize what they just saw changed everything, right?" Marcus looked down at Zephyr, who gazed back with calm pride. "Yeah," he said softly. "It did." By the time the convoy disappeared down the road, the sun was high, painting the valley gold. The forest had returned to its normal hum of birds and wind. Marcus poured water into Zephyr's bowl, his hands finally steady. "You did good, boy," he said. Zephyr lapped the water, then sat close again, brushing his side against Marcus's leg. "You saved them," Marcus murmured, his voice breaking slightly. "And they finally saw you for who you are." Zephyr lifted his head, eyes meeting Marcus's. For once, those golden irises didn't seem wild at all. They were warm, human, almost. The morning broke sharp and cold, the kind of light that cut through fog like a blade. Marcus Reed woke before the sun, though he hadn't really slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashing lights, hands reaching for Zephyr cages slamming shut. He sat at the table, staring at the half-empty coffee cup and the rifle leaning against the wall. Outside, the frost shimmered silver over the ground. The air carried the weight of something coming inevitable, final. Zephyr moved quietly around the cabin, sensing his master's tension. He pressed his muzzle against Marcus's hand, and the man exhaled slowly. "We'll face it," Marcus said under his breath. "Together." A sound in the distance made them both pause, engine steady and deliberate, growing louder by the minute. Marcus rose, joints stiff, heart steady. He opened the door, and the crisp air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine oil and fear. Zephyr stepped outside, first tail low, but calm, standing sentinel at the top of the porch stairs. The convoy came into view, 2 trucks with the Montana Fish and Wildlife emblem, a sheriff's cruiser behind them, and a smaller van with veterinary markings. The vehicles crawled up the dirt road, tires crunching over gravel, engines idling as they stopped near the gate. Doors opened. Men and women stepped out, heavy coats, clipboards, and cautious eyes. Among them was Dr. Brooks, her face pale but resolute. Marcus felt both relief and betrayal in her presence. One of the officials, tall and broad-shouldered with a gray beard, approached first. "Mr. Reed," he called, voice carrying authority. "We're here to take custody of the animal under state and federal regulations. You've been informed this is not a pet." Marcus's voice was calm but firm. "He's not an animal to me. He's family." "Be that as it may," the man replied, hand resting on the tranquilizer rifle slung over his shoulder. "He's still a wild species. This isn't optional." Zephyr growled low, a warning more than a threat. The officer's stance tightened, and 2 others lifted their rifles in reflex. "Easy," Marcus said quickly. "He won't hurt you unless you give him reason." Dr. Brooks stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Everyone stay calm. He's not aggressive, unless provoked." The gray-bearded man gave a small nod, lowering his weapon a fraction. Marcus moved down from the porch, slowly, Zephyr shadowing every step. The wolf's head came to Marcus's waist, his golden eyes flicking between the strangers, measuring them with quiet intelligence. The scene held fragile as glass. Then another car pulled up behind the convoy. Tom Henderson climbed out, followed by an older woman Marcus didn't recognize until she spoke with command that silenced the field. "Judge Margaret Ellis," she said, holding up a folder. "I'm here to mediate this under emergency jurisdiction." The lead officer blinked surprised. "Judge Ellis, with respect, this is a wildlife matter." "And yet you're about to destroy something extraordinary," she countered. She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, is this the animal in question?" "He's not an animal," Marcus said softly. "He's Zephyr." The judge nodded once. "Then let's discuss the law and the heart together." For the first time since sunrise, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. They gathered near the porch. Judge Ellis spread the documents across the hood of a truck. Under state precedent, there are provisions for special therapeutic exemptions involving wildlife-human bonding when proven beneficial to mental health recovery. "I've reviewed Mr. Reed's record. He's a decorated veteran diagnosed with PTSD. Since acquiring this animal, his condition has improved significantly." "Doctor, your notes confirm it, Doctor." Brooks hesitated but nodded. "Yes, he's healthier, happier. I've witnessed it myself." The officer frowned. "This is a wolf, not a therapy dog. We can't make exceptions for apex predators." "We can when that predator has shown no aggression toward humans," the judge countered. The argument hung in the air, logic colliding with fear. Marcus listened in silence, his hand resting on Zephyr's back, feeling the wolf's steady breathing. Then a sound broke through the tension, something massive moving in the trees beyond the clearing. Heads turned, the rustle became crashing, snapping branches, heavy footsteps coming fast. One of the younger officers shouted, "Bear!" Before anyone could react, a massive grizzly burst from the tree line, foam around its mouth, eyes wild and unfocused. The crowd scattered instinctively, rifles, raised shouts cutting through the morning air. Marcus froze, every nerve screaming at him to move, but Zephyr was already in motion. In a blur, he leapt from the porch, planting himself between the bear and the humans. The roar that came from the wolf's throat was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, deep, ancient, commanding. The bear reared up, towering twice Zephyr's height, claws slashing at the air. The wolf didn't flinch. He held his ground, growling so low it vibrated in Marcus's bones. Dr. Brooks screamed for someone to shoot, but the judge shouted, "No, wait!" The grizzly hesitated mid-charge, taken aback by the ferocity in front of it. Zephyr advanced one step, his hackles high teeth bared. For a moment, Predator recognized Predator. Then astonishingly, the bear dropped back to all fours, huffed, and turned away, crashing back into the forest. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone stood frozen, the echo of the bear's retreat fading into the mountains. Zephyr remained still for a heartbeat longer, then turned, trotted back toward Marcus, and sat at his side like nothing had happened. His chest heaved slightly, his fur rippling in the cold breeze. Marcus knelt trembling and pressed his forehead against Zephyr's. "You saved them," he whispered. "You saved all of us." The gray-bearded officer lowered his weapon, awe written across his face. "In 30 years," he muttered, "I've never seen anything like that." Judge Ellis' straightened voice, steady but reverent. "Now, gentlemen, if anyone here still thinks this creature is just another wild animal, I suggest you reconsider." No one argued. The officers looked at one another, uncertain, humbled. Finally, the lead man spoke again, tone different, now soft or respectful. "Mr. Reed, we'll need to file an exemption review. It'll take time, but I think we can make something work." Dr. Brooks smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "He's not a threat. He's proof that some bonds are stronger than instinct." As the officials began packing their equipment, Marcus sat on the porch, still shaking Zephyr's head, resting on his lap. Tom stepped beside him, removing his hat. "Guess you didn't have to fight after all," he said quietly. Marcus managed a shaky laugh. "He fought for me." Tom nodded toward the retreating trucks. You realize what they just saw changed everything, right? Marcus looked down at Zephyr, who gazed back with calm pride. Yeah, he said softly. It did. By the time the convoy disappeared down the road, the sun was high, painting the valley gold. The forest had returned to its normal hum of birds and wind. Marcus poured water into Zephyr's bowl, his hands finally steady. You did good, boy, he said. Zephyr lapped the water, then sat close again, brushing his side against Marcus's leg. You saved them, Marcus murmured, his voice breaking slightly, and they finally saw you for who you are. Zephyr lifted his head, eyes meeting Marcus's. For once, those golden irises didn't seem wild at all. They were warm, human, almost. The snow returned heavier than it had in years, blanketing the valley until the cabin seemed to float in a sea of white. The world felt quiet again, not in the way it did when Marcus Reed was broken, but in the way peace sounds when it finally finds its place to rest. Zephyr was older now, his coat streaked with gray, his pace slower, but still dignified. Time had moved gently between them, soft as falling ash, and though both man and wolf bore the marks of their years, their bond had only deepened, shaped by countless dawn storms and unspoken promises. Marcus had aged too. His hands were more calloused, his beard streaked with silver, but his eyes had lost the hollow distance they once carried. The world knew their story now. Documentary studies, even children's books, had been made about the man and the wolf who healed each other. The Zephyr Clause had been passed into law, and across the country, therapy programs began pairing trauma survivors with animals once considered too wild to help. Marcus had received hundreds of letters from veterans who found purpose again. One man with a hawk, another with a coyote. A woman who rescued a mountain lion cub and learned to live without fear. Each letter carried a piece of the same truth. Love had broken the wall between what the world called wild and what it called human. But Marcus didn't see himself as a hero. He still woke every morning to stoke the fire-feed Zephyr and listen to the wind through the pines as if the world beyond his cabin barely mattered. The older he grew, the more he valued quiet moments, the sound of Zephyr's breathing by the door, the crunch of snow under his boots, the soft echo of wolves calling from the northern ridges. Zephyr would still listen when they called, head lifted, ears forward, eyes glowing gold in the moonlight, but he never went. Marcus used to think it was loyalty, but now he understood it was love, the kind that doesn't need fences or names to define it. One night, as another blizzard rolled over the mountains, Marcus felt the years press down heavier than usual. He sat by the fire notebook, open pen motionless. Zephyr lay nearby, curled close, his breathing shallow but peaceful. The wind rattled the shutters, but inside the cabin, warmth glowed steady. Marcus spoke softly, knowing the wolf could still hear him. Do you remember the storm boy? The one that found us both? Zephyr's tail thumped faintly against the floor. I thought I was saving you, Marcus whispered. But it was you all along. You were saving me. He smiled, his eyes wet in the firelight. You gave me something the world couldn't. A reason to stay, a reason to breathe. A reason to believe that maybe even the wild could forgive what man has done. Zephyr lifted his head weakly and looked at him with those same unchanging eyes, deep and ancient. Marcus moved closer, resting his hand on the wolf's neck. You did your duty, soldier, he said, his voice cracking. You brought me home. The fire snapped softly, and the storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, time seemed to stop. Zephyr sighed, the sound almost human, then closed his eyes and pressed his muzzle into Marcus's palm. Marcus stayed like that for hours, sitting in silence, the world falling away until only the two of them existed. A man and a wolf, both once broken, both made whole through something larger than understanding. When the storm finally passed, dawn crept over the valley in pale gold. Marcus rose stiffly, covered Zephyr gently with the old flannel blanket, and stepped outside into the cold. The sky was clear again, endless and blue, the kind of morning that made everything feel new, no matter how much you'd lost. He looked toward the mountains, where faint howls carried on the wind. They weren't mourning sounds. They were songs of continuity of life that never truly ends. Marcus smiled faintly. "You're free now," he murmured, voice catching in the stillness. "Go run with them." In that moment, he could almost see Zephyr Young again, black coat shining, sprinting through the snow, leaving behind a trail that disappeared into the light. That day, Marcus dug a small grave beneath the pine where the storm first brought them together years ago. He placed Zephyr's collar atop the mound and the old tattered glove beside it, the one from that first night. He sat there until the sun dipped low, not in grief, but in gratitude. When evening came, he returned inside the cabin, quiet, but not empty. The presence of the wolf lingered in every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hiss of the fire, the faint smell of pine and fir. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, set one by the window, and smiled. "Still on duty," he said softly. As weeks turned to months, Marcus began writing again. Not letters, not reports, stories. He wrote about Zephyr, about how the wild isn't something to be conquered, but something that reflects what we fear and love in ourselves. His words spread not through fame, but through truth. Schools read them, veterans quoted them, and people who had forgotten how to feel found themselves crying over a story about a man and a wolf. In spring, Marcus walked the trail they used to follow together, the path that wound behind the cabin and into the endless woods. The snow had melted the earth soft underfoot. Birds returned singing over the fields. Halfway up the ridge, he paused and looked back. The cabin stood small in the distance, smoke curling gently from its chimney. The world was quiet again, not lonely, not broken, just still. He took a deep breath and whispered, "We did good, boy." From the tree line came an answering sound, low and distant, a howl rolling through the valley like a promise kept. Marcus smiled, eyes glistening. "Yeah," he said softly, "I hear you." Years later, long after Marcus himself was gone, hikers who wandered near Silver Creek sometimes spoke of seeing a black shape watching from the ridge, neither hostile nor afraid. It never approached, never attacked, just stood and watched until it disappeared back into the forest. Locals said it was a descendant of Zephyr's pack. Others swore it was Zephyr himself, still guarding the land and the man who gave him purpose. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was what the story left behind, proof that healing doesn't end with death, that loyalty doesn't fade, and that love once born in the heart of a storm never truly dies. At the cabin now preserved as a retreat for veterans, a wooden sign hangs over the porch. It reads simply, "The Wild Heals." Inside, the old flannel blanket remains folded by the hearth, and on the table lies Marcus's final note, written in shaky but steady handwriting. "I thought I rescued a lost wolf, but in truth he rescued a lost man. The wild isn't meant to be tamed, it's meant to be trusted. Love it, and it will teach you how to live again. And outside, when the wind blows through the pines just right, it carries with it a faint echo, not of sorrow, but of companionship that survived every storm, a song of man and wolf, bound forever by the quiet power of grace." The end. If this story moved you, if the bond between Marcus and Zephyr reminded you that love can heal even the deepest scars, take a moment to hit like and subscribe. It helps keep stories like this alive. Tell me what part of their journey touched you most and where you're watching from. I want to know how far their story travels and what it meant to you.